The dead man rises just enough to hand me his own case file. Another death, another story waiting to be opened. Because every fear has a patient, and I keep their records. The curse of Blackthorn Farm. There are houses that carry whispers, houses where the air itself feels heavy, where every shadow hides a story, and every story ends in silence. In the summer of 1972, the Rowan family found such a place. Elias Rowan, his wife Margaret, and their 4 children, Clara, Ruth, Jonah, and little Eliza, were searching for a new beginning. What they found was the end of innocence. The farmhouse stood alone, far from town, its wooden frame weathered by decades of storms. Windows clouded with dust watched them like tired eyes, and a broken weather vane screamed with each passing wind. The locals in Hollow Creek had whispered about the land, but Elias brushed it off as superstition. To him, the price was right, and the house was large enough for a growing family. But Margaret, she felt it. A chill deep in her bones the moment she stepped across the threshold, as if something unseen was already watching, already waiting. Even their dog, Hunter, refused to enter. He growled at the doorway, his fur standing on end, teeth bared at empty air. They dragged him to the porch, but no further. By nightfall, he was tied to a post outside. And for the rest of the evening, Hunter barked and whined, staring into the shadows of the house as if warning them not to stay. Inside, the house was cold. Not the kind of cold that fades with a fire, but the kind that clings to the skin. Each step across the creaking floorboards echoed louder than it should have, as though the house itself was hollow, hungry, waiting to be filled. That first night, it began. At exactly 3:15 in the morning, every clock in the house stopped, not just slowed, not just broken, stopped. The hands froze in silence, and time itself seemed to shudder. Margaret woke up with a gasp. The room was ice cold, her breath fogged in the air. She pulled back the sheets and found fresh bruises on her arms, purple, raw, as though gripped by invisible hands. Elias swore it was nothing, perhaps a restless sleep, perhaps moving injuries from the day. But Margaret knew better. The bruises formed a shape. Fingers. Long, unnatural fingers. As dawn crept through the windows, the family gathered at the breakfast table. The children whispered about footsteps in the hall, about a woman's shadow moving past their bedroom doors. Elias laughed it away, insisting the house was old, full of creaks and drafts. But the truth was already clear. From the very first night, the Rowans weren't alone in Blackthorn Farm. Something had been waiting for them, and now it was awake. By the second night, the house had begun to show its teeth. Clara and Ruth were the first to notice it. Their bedroom door, once shut, was open in the morning, even though both swore they had locked it. Ruth whispered that she heard soft footsteps moving up and down the hallway. Not quick, not hurried, but slow, like someone who didn't want to be seen. Jonah, the only son, complained that whispers came through the walls. He pressed his ear against the plaster and swore he could hear voices. A woman's voice, murmuring words he couldn't understand. Words that didn't belong to any living tongue. In the cellar, the air grew foul. A smell of damp earth, mixed with something sharper, rotting, as if something had died long ago, but never stopped decaying. Margaret avoided the cellar stairs, but one night, when she passed the door, she heard it. 3 sharp knocks, slow, deliberate, as though something inside was asking to be let out. Then came the first sign that this was no ordinary haunting. Hunter, The dog who refused to enter the house was found dead at the edge of the tree line, his body twisted unnaturally, his throat torn open, yet no blood soaked the ground. The children screamed when they saw him. Elias buried the dog behind the barn, telling them it was only an accident, but Margaret noticed something he didn't. Carved into the dirt near Hunter's body were symbols, circles and slashes burned into the earth, as if branded there by fire. That same night, Ruth awoke to see her closet door slowly creak open. In the darkness, she swore she saw a woman hanging from the inside beam, swaying gently back and forth. Her face pale, her mouth wide, her eyes locked on Ruth's. But when Elias rushed in and pulled open the door, it was empty. Only coats, only shadows. Margaret grew weaker. Her arms and legs bore more bruises each morning, though she could not explain them. The children grew pale, restless, refusing to sleep. Even the air inside the farmhouse seemed heavier now. And yet, the worst had not yet come. Because the house was not simply haunted, it was hungry, and soon it would feed. By the end of the first week, Margaret could not ignore it anymore. The bruises on her arms were spreading. The children refused to sleep alone, and even Elias, who tried to stay strong, woke in the night to the sound of footsteps crossing the upstairs hall. The family turned to the church in Hollow Creek. Father Malik, a stern but kind man, listened carefully as Margaret spoke of shadows, whispers, and the death of their dog. At first, he urged prayer, but when Margaret rolled up her sleeves and showed him the hand-shaped bruises, his face went pale. Knowing the family was in danger, Father Malik reached out to two people he trusted with such matters: Dr. Nathaniel Gray, a scholar of the occult, and his wife Celine, a woman with a gift she wished she did not have. Celine could see the dead. She could feel what lingered in places where others would not dare to go. The next evening, the Grays arrived at Blackthorn Farm. The house groaned as they stepped inside, as if it knew them, as if it feared them. Celine paused at the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. She whispered only two words: "It's here." Celine moved through each room, her eyes wide, her hand brushing the walls. She felt the pain, the fear, the deaths that had happened here, and when she stepped into the cellar, she nearly collapsed. The smell of rot struck her first, but beneath it, something else, the stink of burning. She told them the truth. The land was cursed. The house belonged to Isolde Blackthorn, a woman accused of witchcraft more than a century ago. Villagers claimed she had taken her newborn child into the woods and returned alone. Days later, they found her body hanging in the barn, her mouth twisted in a final scream. Before she died, she had cursed the land. Her words promised that every family who lived there would suffer, that she would take their children one by one. Margaret's face was drained of color. Elias tried to protest, to call it a story made to frighten, but Celine shook her head. She had seen the shadow of Isolde already, and it had chosen Margaret as its vessel. That night, the Grays stayed in the farmhouse. They wanted proof. They wanted to see what the family had endured, and Blackthorn Farm was ready for them. Dr. Gray set up cameras in the main rooms. Celine placed small bells on the doors and windows, silent watches that would ring if anything moved. The family gathered together in the living room, waiting. Hours passed. The fire burned low, and then, just as the clock struck 3:15, the bells began to ring, one after another, soft at first, then frantic, as though unseen hands rushed through the house, touching every door, every window. Elias ran to the hall, but the air was colder than ice. His breath poured from his mouth in thick clouds. And then they saw it. On the wall of the living room, a shadow stretched itself tall. At first, it looked human, but its arms were too long. Its fingers clawed the floor, its head bent at an impossible angle. The children screamed as it twisted, breaking apart, vanishing, and then appearing again in the corner of the ceiling. Clara was dragged across the floor by her hair, kicking and crying as though pulled by something no one could see. Elias tried to grab her, but an unseen force hurled him back against the wall. And Eliza, little Eliza, sat in the corner, whispering to the dark. Celine bent close to hear her, and what she heard chilled her blood. Eliza whispered, "The lady says Mama has to give us back." Margaret clutched her chest, gasping for air. Bruises bloomed across her skin, as if invisible hands pressed harder and harder. Her eyes rolled back, and when she spoke, it was not her voice. It was deeper, older, the voice of a woman who had not drawn breath in over 100 years. Celine fell to her knees, whispering that the possession had already begun. And in that silence, the family realized the truth. They weren't fighting for the house anymore. They were fighting for Margaret's soul. After that night, nothing in the Rowan house was the same. Margaret was slipping away. Her laughter was gone. Her voice changed. Her eyes seemed hollow, as if something inside her was looking out. She would wander the halls at night, whispering to herself. When Elias asked who she was talking to, she only smiled. At the breakfast table, her hand shook so violently the glass shattered in her grip. Her children sat frozen in fear as Margaret licked the blood from her fingers and whispered, "It doesn't hurt anymore." Celine tried to help her, but the thing inside Margaret was growing stronger. One night, as Celine prayed softly in the kitchen, every door in the house slammed shut at once. The sound shook the walls. The children screamed, and from the cellar came a woman's voice, long, drawn out, singing a lullaby no living soul should know. Elias carried the children to the inn in town, hoping to keep them safe. But by dawn, Margaret was gone. The investigators searched every room, every field, every shadow, until Celine heard it, the faint cry of a child echoing through the woods. They followed the sound back to the farmhouse, and the cellar door was wide open. There, in the blackness below, stood Margaret, her hair wild, her eyes empty, her skin crawling with dark marks. In her hands, she gripped a rusty knife. Beside her, Clara and little Eliza sobbed, too terrified to move. When she spoke, it was not Margaret at all. It was the voice of Isolde Blackthorn. "The pact must be kept. The children are mine." Dr. Gray shouted for Father Malik. They tried to pull Margaret back, but she moved with a strength no human body should have. The demon had taken her, and now it wanted blood. The fight for Margaret's soul had begun. The cellar of Blackthorn Farm became a pit of hell that night. Margaret stood at its center, the knife glinting in her hand, her children weeping at her feet. Her eyes were gone, replaced with blackness, endless and empty. The voice that poured from her lips was not her own. It was older, colder. It was Isolde Blackthorn, returned to claim what she believed was hers. Father Malik held his cross high, shouting the words of the rite. His voice trembled but did not break. The cellar walls shook. The lamps flickered. The very air bent with a low moan, like the house itself was alive and in pain. Elias tried to rush forward, to grab his wife, But the moment his hand touched her arm, he was thrown backwards, slammed against the wall with bone-cracking force. Margaret raised the knife over Eliza. Her hands trembled, not with weakness, but with the pull of two souls fighting for control. Celine shouted to Elias to stay down. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm, calling out Margaret's name. For a moment, Margaret's eyes flickered, her mouth quivered. Somewhere inside, she was still there, still listening. But Isolde's voice thundered back, rattling the walls. "You cannot have her. She is mine. She chose me." The lights blew out. Darkness swallowed the cellar. Only the children's cries remained until the fire in the lanterns sparked again, burning blood red. Celine fell to her knees beside Margaret, clutching her hand, whispering memories, the wedding day, the children's laughter in the fields. The first time Margaret held Eliza in her arms, the knife wavered, her grip weakened. Elias crawled across the floor, his voice hoarse, begging, pleading for her to come back. For a moment, it seemed to work. Margaret's body convulsed, her voice breaking between screams of her own and the guttural roars of Isolde. Father Malik raised the cross once more and spoke the final words of the exorcism. His voice broke into a shout, echoing through the cellar. The ground trembled, the walls cracked, dust fell like rain. The house itself screamed with a sound no human throat could make, and then it was over. Margaret collapsed, the knife clattering from her hand. The children rushed to her, sobbing, holding her tight. The shadow of Isolde was gone, for now. But Celine, she knew the truth. Evil does not die, it only waits, and Blackthorn Farm would wait for the next family foolish enough to call it home. Morning came to Blackthorn Farm. The storm had passed, the air heavy and wet with rain. The house stood silent, its windows dark, its walls scarred from the night before. Inside, Margaret lay weak in her bed, her children curled beside her. Elias never left her side, his hand locked around hers, as though he feared letting go would bring the darkness back. Celine packed her notes into a leather journal, every detail of the night written in a trembling hand. Dr. Gray promised the family it was over, that the evil had been driven out, but Celine wasn't so certain. She had seen the shadows that clung to the corners of the cellar long after the prayers were spoken. She had heard the whispers when the others claimed silence. Isolde Blackthorn was gone, but not destroyed. Somewhere between these walls, something still waited, watching, listening. And though Margaret's soul was spared, her eyes still carried the weight of what she had seen. Some doors, once opened, never truly close. Years later, travelers would speak of the old Rowan house, abandoned, rotting, and cursed. They'd whisper of cries heard at night, of lights flickering in empty windows, of the lullaby of a dead woman drifting through the fields. And they would say, no one ever stayed at Blackthorn Farm for long. Because some stories never end.